What if I told you that the very programs designed to make the workplace more accessible for everybody might actually be keeping people out? Not because the intention is wrong, well, not according to some people anyway, but because the execution misses the mark. If you've ever felt like the misfit in the workplace or unable to get in the room, stick around because this one's for you. According to many people over the course of my career, I'm a diverse person. So when I started to hear that diversity programs were getting cut in the United States due to the anti-woke agenda, I was concerned. Especially when I started to hear that people were losing their jobs purely because of aspects of their identity. It's a tale as old as time though, right? I want to be very clear at the start of this video that I never will agree with the clumsy, overprivileged people making decisions just so they can feel powerful and appeal to their base. Anything to increase those column inches, right? But bear with me here. The tide turning may not be totally a terrible thing, because it turns out we don't need to label things DEI to make the workplace a whole lot better for a whole range of people. In fact, in some cases, it might be more helpful if we don't. Have you ever seen a DEI initiative in action, good or bad? Have you ever been the recipient of support? I'm curious, did it help? Let me know in the comments. So I recently read an article in the Harvard Business Review entitled Achieve DEI Goals Without DEI Programs by Frank Dobbin and Alexandra Kalev. I thought, finally, this is what I have been talking about for years. This article was a study of 800 large organizations and gave a series of case studies to showcase the fact that if we focus on high performance, then we might just get diversity as well. But are there flaws in their argument that these high performance management techniques can be useful for all people, regardless of which diversity box you happen to tick? Stay tuned to find out why I have personally been thinking about this for a really long time, the problems with some DEI initiatives, and some of the initiatives that have been proven to increase diversity as well as increasing business performance. So let's start with why I have personally found DEI programs problematic. Probably the most important point is othering. Of course, there have been several valuable initiatives that have helped to create change in the workplace and get wider representation. However, I'm somebody who's carried around the label woman and chronically ill for a large proportion of my career. I guess that woman label was there for all of it, even if I didn't know it. More recently, had the label of autistic or neurodivergent. And I've actually really struggled with the additional baggage that labeling brings. And that's in addition to the already complex challenges and external perceptions that have littered my career journey. I've previously talked in a video about how the autism diagnosis led to me really retreating from the idea of being labeled. It was something that has really impacted my identity and therefore the opportunities that I've had and how I take on those opportunities. I wish I could just be seen as myself, my own skills, my own strengths, instead of being labeled by all the baggage that I carry around with me. And of course, every single label comes with the notion of you are different, you are other. Now, I could probably do a whole other video on the value of labels and how it is helpful, but being labeled in the workplace is immediate othering. In my first business, I spent more time discussing what it was to be woman in business, woman in STEM, woman in technology, woman in leadership. Then I spent discussing the things that underpinned my business. People would give me a platform to meet a quota rather than taking the time to figure out what skills, strengths, opinions, perspectives I could actually bring to a discussion. After one particularly difficult moment, which I discussed in a previous video, I actually started to feel like I needed to say no to a lot of these opportunities because it felt like all anyone ever wanted to ask me about was my experience of being a woman. My womanness is very visible, even though it's not a part of my identity that I actually resonate very strongly with. And I know that probably rings like, not like other girls, I don't feel that way, and actually most supportive people in my life are women. But I don't live up to a lot of gender stereotypes. I don't fit into a lot of gender norms, and I don't have some of the things that cause challenges to other women in the workplace. Now, compared to my womanhood, which is very visible, both my chronic illness and my autism are actually quite invisible. And they come with myriad of challenges that nobody ever sees. If a workplace is designed well, these challenges are reduced and the right opportunities open up, and I can bring a lot of value into a business, into an organization, without burning myself out over and over and over again. But usually this requires a fundamental shift in mindset. And the focus needs to be on where individuals can bring strengths, skills, value, instead of slapping on a label, putting money into a diversity program that is one size fits all, and then patting yourself on the back for doing something good. The most overwhelming feeling that I've had in the workplace is that of misfit. And part of me is kind of happy that I haven't fitted in with a lot of the corporate cultures that I've come across. There's often been a strong mismatch in values, and let's face it, there's something fun about being a little bit rebellious. But being able to see through all these glass walls and rarely being able to get in has left me with an unstable income, a lack of access to training, support, mentorship, and a lack of supported career progression that comes with being in employment. So whilst DEI initiatives might help people to get through the door, they sometimes feel like you're being invited through the side door. You're allowed into the building, but you're never really allowed into the room where it happens. And if your voice is only listened to talk on the perspective of women or neurodivergent people, you soon get left out of the real conversations. Have you ever not been referred, not been supported, not been listened to or included because you didn't quite fit the mold? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your story might resonate more than you think. So I think the othering in the workplace is one of the most powerful things because it really knocks at somebody's identity and somebody's self-worth. However, to get a little bit more tangible, we can look at DEI programs themselves and how often they have been less effective than one might think. Now, there is definitely mixed data about the value of DEI programs. There has been lots of value that is shown, but they overall often fall short. So what are the issues that make them fail? First of all, many people treat DEI as a tick box exercise. Oh, I just realized I haven't even defined DEI. For those of you who don't know, diversity, equity, and inclusion is what it stands for. You often see it combined with other words as well. More important words, in my opinion, actually, like cohesion and cultures of belonging. Anyway, so why do these programs fail? Yeah, we treat them as a tick box exercise, which many organizations do. They provide a one-off online training with a bunch of buzzwords, or you might have to go to a day's workshop or something on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And often these don't work. Don't get me wrong, I actually have worked with some really amazing facilitators who run these workshops as well, and they really do create spaces in the room where real conversations can happen. And that's where we might start to make a real difference. However, I recently completed my diversity training in an organization where I have experienced some of the worst discrimination of my life, and continue to do so. And in this organization, the training was absolutely terrible. A bunch of buzzwords, a bunch of missions and statements about what the organization is trying to achieve, but absolutely nothing about how somebody can actually go and get some support if they happen to face microaggressions in the workplace, for example. One of the other reasons DEI fails, and perhaps again when it comes through these kind of training programs, is because it's done as a one-size-fits-all. Not everybody who fits under that diversity umbrella is the same. Not every woman is the same. Not every autistic person is the same. I could go on. People are individuals, therefore when we're in the workplace, in order to get the best support, we need to be treated as individuals. We don't need to be treated as our label. For example, a lot of the challenges that come with being a woman overlap with being a mother, and those two things get conflated. Those are not my challenges because I don't have any children or any dependents that I'm looking after. I have my own set of challenges. When we talk about autism, a lot of the times the challenges that are tackled are those to do with the common kind of traditional autistic traits. I am yet to see any initiatives that start to look at how we deal with mirroring and masking in the workplace and the impact that that has. And just taking off the mask is not a solution. The other thing is that most of these initiatives are designed to fix the other, to fix the misfit, instead of focusing on fixing the culture and the leadership. This is a massive bugbear of mine, and I will go on and talk about this more later on in the video. Some of the initiatives that are put in to help with increasing diversity in the workplace are to do with quotas, and that relates to affirmative action, so giving those who fit into certain diverse groups more of an opportunity to step up into certain roles. And also tokenization, so going, oh, we need to have a woman in this room, we need to have a woman on this panel, we need to have a woman in this board. Saying this like this because this is just what I've heard so many times. And there are a lot of problems with that. Whilst there can be some benefits with getting a critical mass of a different way of thinking and a different type of person, different perspectives into a room, often these initiatives don't actually solve the problem. So if we explicitly invite underrepresented groups of people into the room via often just one individual, this is done without actually changing any of the culture and the environment that they're stepping into. It leaves them incredibly vulnerable. So either they speak up and they're probably going to get ostracized for it, or they end up just merging into the groupthink of the rest of the group. So this only really is going to make a difference if it's combined with other ways to change the culture. And perhaps these ways can be a little more covert. Perhaps we can do this under the radar without othering people, rather focusing on the skills of the individuals. And just because a couple of women are invited to sit on the board, for example, it doesn't mean that they are going to have the skills, insight, inclination, or the power to actually make real changes across an organization. If you've ever found yourself as the token diverse person, and by the way, I am aware that none of us are diverse. I can't be the only diverse person because I am only one person. And in a group of one, I'm the normal. Anyway, back to my point. If you are invited somewhere because of your lack of Y chromosome or your positive HLA-B27 gene, you should probably go look that up. It's easy to start feeling like the only reason people are allowing you to participate is because you tick boxes. It has been made so clear to me many times, generally by men in their 50s and 60s, that I'm here to bring a different perspective, which of course can be a very positive thing, but more often than not, that perspective is drowned out by the predominant way of thinking. And whilst I'd love to sit here and say, I should have more energy, it's not lost on me that I'm talking about being invited into rooms, when should I even have to feel that way? But over the years, decades of microaggressions have left me feeling like that. It does knock your confidence, it knocks your value, and it certainly does make you feel like the imposter that you are. Having said that, being different is not something that I am ashamed of or that I have any problem with. In fact, I kind of like it. I want to stand out for my personality, for my skills, for my knowledge, for my unique perspectives. But being labelled as different because of inherent parts of your identity that you can't change and that are often perceived to be deficits. It's just not cool. So as I mentioned, my overall issue with most DEI initiatives is that they are designed poorly. They other people, and they are usually focused on fixing the issues with the diverse person, overcoming the deficits of misfits like me, giving me more confidence, giving me more skills, giving me a space where I can hang out with all the other misfits, all while being kept away from the room where it happens. If you've ever felt like the other in the workplace, but you couldn't even name why, tell me, like, what was the moment you realized it? What tipped you off? For me, it was a very long way into my career before I really realized that it was other people's perceptions of me as a woman that was actually causing me to have a different experience. But the issue isn't with my skills, and my confidence is knocked because of the lack of skill in others and the culture which wants to keep focusing on the challenges that I might have instead of the strengths that I bring. Now, affinity groups can be helpful, and actually that is when I first realized that my experiences as a woman were not the same as the experiences of men and were the same as many other women. So I have valued being in groups of women where we can have conversations about this type of thing. However, I have probably now spent hundreds of hours talking with women about the challenges that women very specifically face in the workplace, all the while being in jobs that don't actually have anything to do with diversity and inclusion. And I've heard the same stories over and over again. Now, I don't stand in the way of anybody having the right to tell their own story and telling it to people in a space where they feel safe. I do think that there is value in that. However, I started to realize we're having the same conversations over and over again. We're going round and round in circles. We're spending time and energy talking about these issues. Show me a cis white man who has had to have these same conversations, discussing their barriers instead of getting on with solving the challenges of the actual job. It's actually not a coincidence now that I feel more confident making videos about this subject than I do about, say, quantum physics or running a business, despite the fact that I have been recognized for both of those things. As a 17-year-old, I would devour books on science and philosophy. I would be told how unusual for a girl to be so into science and maths. I even quite liked that narrative at the time, not realizing the sexist implications of it. I liked that people saw that I could be an achiever in hard subjects. So imagine the shock when, despite finishing top in my class at university in these subjects, the only thing I was really seen as was woman. My strengths were soon forgotten by myself and others as I was systematically deconstructed until all that was left was a deeply depressed young person with an eating disorder looking through those glass walls and wondering what I could have done to be allowed to just get on with the job. Meanwhile, everybody else just seemed to be wanting to slap each other's backs and haul themselves up a ladder without really having any interest in what might make a real difference in the world. If I tried to jump into any of the conversations, I was made very aware that my voice was not welcome here. In my last video, I discussed some of the challenges that I face due to being a woman with autism and how intersectionality has amplified those barriers. So I have sought help over the years. Almost every single time I've had help with regards to dealing with having a chronic illness or having autism, the advice has come down to one thing. You need to lower your expectations. For some reason, I'm not very satisfied with that response. In fact, I focused on science for 8 years solid, from undergrad to postgrad, and that was the biggest downhill spiral of my life. So I'm yet to have found a DEI initiative that has really dealt with any of the real challenges. Maybe some of the programs described later on in this video will help, let's see. And I have a firm belief that focusing on high performance management could actually offer some solutions. Because in my opinion, the issue isn't with the other, the misfit. The issue is with toxic cultures and poor leadership and management. I was recently listening to a podcast interview with Michael Lewis, who's the author of Moneyball and The Big Short and The Blind Side. I haven't seen that one, that's why I couldn't remember it. And this interview is actually titled "What Moneyball Can Teach Us About Finding Undervalued Talent." Ooh, I like that term, undervalued talent. I think that's actually what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are underemployed, unemployed, who have skills, who have talents, but it's not getting recognized, it's not getting noticed. In fact, just their deficits and their challenges are getting noticed. And he said something that I think is incredibly important, and if all organizations thought this way, then this could change everything with regard to talent. He said, "I think if you can change the environment, you can change the person." And we all experience this, right? We all know what it feels like to be in one environment, one type of culture, and to feel small, to feel less than. And then to be in other environments where we feel like ourselves, we feel buoyed up, we feel like we can get on with the job instead of having to focus on all of the things that we fall short on. I think anyone who has ever felt othered in the workplace really understands this. And you know that you can spend a lifetime working really freaking hard, but never being heard. You work on building your confidence for years, work for free for decades to build your experience, but still you're stuck on the outside. We don't live in a perfect world. It's not a meritocracy. But it is absolutely possible to build environments that can work for a lot wider range of people than we do at the moment. And this will come from focusing on making the changes where they are really needed. In leadership, in middle management, and in the culture. And the big thing for me, I think we really need to stop tolerating poor skills in people who are in charge of other people. That's the epidemic. I had this in very real time last week. I had 2 meetings in 2 different organizations with 2 people. And one organization, the meeting was with somebody slightly less senior. Both of these meetings were about the same thing. He said to me, I've already discussed this in my last video, but essentially he used my ambition, the goals that I had, that if I was successful at them would add value to the organization. He used that as a way to pull me down. I had the same meeting elsewhere with somebody who's actually, if he was in the same organization, would have been the boss of this other person. And his response was, "Yes, I've had a look at this. I think you would be a really great fit. Let's give it a go, even though we don't have much time. What ideas do you have? Let's talk about it. You should talk to this person, and I'm ready to sign it off for you." Now, that's a very simple way of illustrating a difference between a culture that promotes high performance and ambition and a culture that others people. And that second response costs no more to the organization, feel more confident, more empowered, and to go after something that I'm interested in. But it also is going to help the organization and potentially bring tens of thousands of pounds into that organization. Which culture are you currently in? In one that slams doors shut or one that actually opens them for you? Are you stuck in that hallway, looking into those glass-fronted conference rooms like so many of us have been? Let me know. I'd love to know where you're at. So now I think it's time to segue into these high performance practices that were outlined in the HBR article. So immediately there was one glaringly obvious problem with this article in that it talks about DEI but only focuses on gender and race, which of course are incredibly important, but doesn't exactly cover DEI. It kind of goes back to my point is when we talk about DEI, like what are we actually talking about? It's incredibly meaningless. And then another thing is, of course, for any kind of corporate management practice to be helpful to anyone, they have to actually be in a job in that corporation. They actually have to have a job in the first place, which we know is incredibly difficult for neurodivergent people. So, do we think all these techniques are going to be helpful for all people who fit under the DEI umbrella? They've looked at different aspects of an employment cycle, from recruitment, training, mentoring, all the way through to actually having to do layoffs. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Oracle referral program. Now, of all the businesses we're going to talk about, this is the one that I know the most, as my first business was partnered with Oracle, as we were using Oracle Cloud Computing. I was even one of their faces of the Your Tomorrow Today campaign. They have flown me out to San Francisco and I have talked at their events. I've even been involved in the OWL events, the Oracle Women's Leadership events. So I've had a tiny little insight into the way they think about diversity. Wasn't involved at all with any of their campaigns or anything else. So way back in the day, the billionaire founder of Oracle, billionaire because of Oracle, I should say, not billionaire when he founded it, Larry Ellison, wanted to combine high performance management with cloud-based HR tools. And if you know Oracle, this is probably what you know Oracle for, like HR systems. They had recognized at some point that the best recruiters for new staff and for staff who were going to perform really well once they were in the job were current staff. So referral programs could be very powerful for bringing the right people into the organization. So Oracle built an employee referral feature into their human capital management systems in early 2012.
What?
So this feature allows employers to push jobs out to employees who could either apply for those jobs themselves or use a social sourcing feature to then refer these jobs to friends or family, people in their own social networks. And because this is what Oracle do, this is now a tool that is available to about 20% of the market. And because referrals have become known to be so effective, it's actually been built into many of the different types of HR software that is used. Now, there is a whole white paper that you can read on employee referrals that Oracle produced. And of course, they're going to produce data on this because it's a feature in their software, a differentiating feature at that time in their software. My initial thoughts at reading this was, how on earth can employee referral programs make a difference? Because surely you're actually then just giving more of a leg up to people who are associated with the business already via their friends, family, social network. Actually, the Harvard Business Review article, which did do this 800 firm analysis, has shown that referrals do in fact increase diversity. And it's because it's essentially a permissioning exercise. Apparently, especially people in frontline jobs, people of color in frontline jobs, often weren't referring family and friends because they didn't feel empowered to unless they were actually asked to explicitly. And that's what having this button and these programs do. They give you the allowance to send it out there to your family, your friends, your networks. This report says referral programs increase the proportion of Black, Hispanic, and Asian managers by about 5%. We found that when companies combine referral programs with employee resource groups, which can be effective in publicizing referral programs, they see an additional increase of at least 7% in the proportion of managers who are Black, Hispanic, and Asian. Now, this is the only data given for the efficacy of these programs, which does leave me on the fence around whether or not they are actually that valuable. But I do think if we can start to change the demographic of managers, we can start to see a shift in the culture of an organization. But does this change the demographics enough? And are those managers going to feel empowered enough to make changes to culture? So these days, 30 to 50% of new hires come from employee referrals. That's a massive percentage. But do we actually think they make a difference for neurodivergent people? Now, this is something I found some other research on, the London School of Economics. This study by LSE finds that candidates who disclose their condition to potential referrers are more likely to be referred, but only if they are men. However, this apparent advantage is fraught with stereotypes. Women with autism are perceived as deviating not only from the ideal worker stereotype, but also from societal gender norms such as warmth and friendliness. It also goes on to say that even if you know people who are in organisations, they may not refer you if you're neurodivergent because they unconsciously assess us against the ideal worker. And many neurodivergent people are going to fall short when somebody looks at them against this unspoken standard. Now, there are suggestions about how we might fix this, which includes challenging that ideal worker bias. And again, this is definitely my view, is we have to focus on the strengths that the individuals can bring into that organisation. The other suggestions include making inclusion policies actionable and visible. So I do agree that we do have to make things actionable in order to make them effective. And then one of the other reasons that was given that people were hesitant to refer autistic people was because they weren't sure that the organizations would have the training and support required for that individual in the organization. So again, I think what bothers me about this notion that we need a ton of extra support and extra development, we don't if the conditions are right. If the conditions are wrong, then we're going to struggle, and then we are going to need things to pull us back out of those burnouts and those shutdowns and those other issues that we might end up having. But if the conditions are right, then we are able to manage ourselves, we are able to bring our strengths, and we are able to engage in the types of training and development that you should be giving to everyone across your organization. One of the other recommendations here is to train employees on ethical and inclusive referrals. I'm sorry if I remain cynical on how effective that training is likely to be. Now, I have been really lucky to get work via referrals. However, not in large corporate entities, generally in freelance work. And I do wonder if perhaps I have been too vocal about some of the challenges that I do face in a corporate environment, which may have ended up being something that has held me back. I think one of the biggest reasons I probably wouldn't benefit from this kind of scheme is because I'm not easy to fit into a box. I probably would have benefited earlier in my career. The reason I'm not easy to fit into a box is because I've had to hustle, I've had to scramble around, I've had to do the things, where the opportunities come up. And so it doesn't always look particularly linear. I definitely think I could personally do a better job of taking time to figure out and carve out what it is I want to be known for, and therefore that might be easier for people to refer me. Right, I need to take a little break. I will be back again to finish off recording this video. Oh hi, sorry, do things look a little bit weird and different? That's because it's tomorrow. I've done my best to try to look the same for some consistency in this video, but yeah, my hair is now washed. I'm sure it looks different. Let's get back to the initiatives that are case studied in this paper. And the next one is all about skills development at Walmart. So Walmart introduced a skills development academy back when it was not doing as good as its competitors on performance. At the time, the introduction of this academy was quite a big change in the retail sector because it wasn't just teaching people how to use the tills or the checkouts if you're in America. It wasn't just talking about policies and procedures. It was actually giving staff kind of management type training. They even referred to it as Management 101. They worked on teamwork, they worked on communication, and they also had a careers training track within this training. And that allowed employees to set career goals and then have tangible ways to work towards those career goals. And this actually had a measurable impact on the diversity of managers and executives at Walmart. So overall, as you can see, there was an increase of managers and executives of colour, and there was an increase in women executives. Note, we aren't still at parity in 2024, but you can see that there has been a marked change. And of course, there's several other factors at play, but it seems that this training is something that paid off. In some of the other case studies I'm going to talk about, we'll also look at changes that have been made even against general tide that is turning. Now, In my opinion, good training and development is absolutely vital for any businesses. And for me personally, this kind of training would have made a massive difference early in my career. I think particularly a focus on career goals and how to meet them is something that I've never really had help with on the outside. It's something that I've thought about a lot for myself. To be able to do that in a guided way would have been really helpful, as would some of those other skills like communication I picked up along the way. I've done my own self-development, but to have had that as training early on would have just helped me to understand those skills better early on. And I think it's probably quite common for autistic people to jump into different trainings, especially if it's something that can be done kind of in your own quiet space. It's a very tangible way to work on things. And if it's aligned with a special interest, or maybe it becomes a special interest, then that's also going to supercharge that learning and help keep you on a really strong career path. It's not only motivational, but it's also going to make you feel more connected to that particular organization. Reading this also reminded me of an early career woman I was working with who worked for one of the big four, and it was amazing the kind of training and development that they were getting. And just another example really of like, you're on the inside, you get all of this excellent, or you can potentially get all of this excellent development. They had their pathways really clearly laid out for them, but it was also very clear what they needed to do to get to those next stages in their career. And they even had time, mentors, blueprints really for how to get to that next step. So this allowed them to focus on figuring out what was going to work for them, where they wanted to go, how to build the skills and the support and the evidence that they needed to move to the next stage in their career. And I think it would be brilliant if that was something that existed across all employers. Of course, you've got to be in employment to be able to make the most of that kind of thing. I would be lying if I didn't say the little green-eyed monster wasn't coming out for me at that point in time. So things at Walmart have definitely changed. The election last year in the US and lots of pressure to cut diversity programs. They did make public promises to cut DEI initiatives and end the preference for women and minority-owned suppliers, which of course is going to then be very challenging for certain people. However, they have not touched their training programs, which is actually one of their main sources of workforce diversity. So with this program, they may have figured out how to make the workplace more accessible, more navigatable for all people without having to label it as DEI. Next up, we're going to IBM, and we're going back to 2003. And I know a lot of these things I'm talking about, the program started a long time ago, and I think that's partly because this allows for that more longitudinal data to be collected so we can see more of an impact over time. So when Sam Palmisano took over as CEO at IBM in 2003, he really wanted to introduce more talent management through knowledge sharing and one-to-one mentoring. And they even built a platform with different training and including a kind of real-time mentoring app called Dear Mentor. And then this commitment to mentoring has continued on to CEO Ginny Rometty, who also is very keen to make sure that there is mentoring across the organization. Now, these programs are put in place to enhance performance across the whole organization, but it has now made IBM one of the most diverse organizations in the tech sector. And the interesting thing was that over the pandemic, IBM continued to see the percentage of women growing, even though women were being lost from the industry over the pandemic. So it was bucking a trend that was going on. The paper says, our research reveals that when formal mentoring programs are in place for all staff, they boost the representation of women and people of color in management across industries. In highly skilled industries such as computing, electronics, and chemicals, mentoring programs increase the share of managers who are white, black, Hispanic, and Asian women, or are black and Asian men, by at least 15% over several years. In fact, in these industries, mentoring is the single most effective diversity booster. And you can see in the data that there is definitely growth. across all levels of the organization. Now, again, I do continue to think just because these numbers are going up, and they're still not going up that massively, but they are definitely trending in the right direction. That doesn't tell us everything we need to know about diversity in these organizations and whether or not these organizations have built cultures of belonging for everybody. Next up, I want to talk about flexibility and stability at Gap. This is also case studied in this article. So Gap was having real issues post the financial crisis in 2008. They had to cut a lot of roles, and there was a lot of adjusting of schedules at the last minute. There was a lot of staff anxiety and poor engagement. Now, it was actually legislative changes that forced Gap to make changes, especially when it came to shift workers and those who were on, I guess, what we would call 0-hour contracts here in the UK. I'm not quite sure what they call that in the US. And after this legislation, they went on to guarantee a certain number of hours per week. They would give stable week-to-week schedules, which obviously helps with planning, it helps with routine, and they would give standard start and end times to shifts. But they also allowed employees to adjust their own schedules through an app called Shift Messenger. And this allowed them to swap shifts with others in a very simple and easy way. Not only did it show positive impacts on staff morale and engagement, but it also showed an increase in productivity. In-store sales increased by 7%, productivity increased by 5%. They generated an extra 2.9 million in profits during the trial period for this program. And that was 100 times more than the amount of money that they'd put into it. So it definitely paid off from a business perspective, but it also made the employees feel more valued and supported, which makes them feel more motivated and more engaged. And then, of course, it makes sense that that would lead to better business outcomes. Plus, since making these changes, there has been a rise of people of colour in management roles. So would this help somebody who's neurodivergent? Yes. I mean, to me, this feels like something that's incredibly helpful. If you can have that stability, that routine, but also have the ability to swap shifts when needed, and the knowledge that you are going to get a certain number of hours every week and therefore a certain income every week, this is positive. It's not lost on me that a lot of these jobs in retail are probably relatively low paid jobs, but I think the fact that this has shown an increase in women and people of colour in management also indicates that those people who are doing better in those more junior roles perhaps have more of a pathway to then move up into more senior, more management roles. So I do definitely see this as a positive thing. I mean, I've constructed my life in such a way where I do have some flexibility and some schedule, but I do all that for myself, and I've done that by staying outside of businesses where I often feel too trapped, and I feel very guilty when I have flare-ups, when I have days when I can't go in, when I need to take more of a break, and so I've kind of opted out of the workplace. But if you were able to retain a salary as well as having flexibility and structure, that would be great. Now, the final case study here is performance-based retention at Amazon. We could probably do a whole deep dive on Amazon and its workplace practices, and there have been whole movies made about this. I'm going to focus in on what's talked about in this article. So, have you heard of purposeful Darwinism? This is how people refer to Jeff Bezos's performance-centric culture at Amazon. Top performers are rewarded, and managers are given unregretted attrition targets, i.e. fire people without regret if they're not performing. Now, in some ways, isn't this the meritocracy of which we dream? It's all about how well you perform, and you're being judged on your level of performance. Perform better, do better, perform badly, get fired. Well, it all depends on how we judge performance, and it doesn't really take into account kind of equity. I think that if this is combined with really good skills training and really good mentoring, then it can be more powerful. Now, this case study is quite an unusual one because it's looking at downsizing. And post-COVID, Amazon downsized by 27,000 people. Which, of course, has got to be incredibly hard for those who lost their jobs during this time. But the way it was done is quite interesting because it went against the trend. Now, believe it or not, and this does shock me, apparently we're still doing layoffs on a kind of first in, first out basis. It's not really a surprise, actually. I know here in the UK there is much less job protection if you've been in a job for less than 2 years. So legally, it's just easier for companies to get rid of people if they haven't been there for as long. And of course, at that point, you haven't proven your loyalty to the business. So they also often, if you're doing layoffs, that's going to be in what they call non-essential functions. So things like training, which of course we know they're not really non-essential at all. They have a massive impact on the performance of a business. And if you use those kind of methods, so first in, first out, or getting rid of those non-essential functions, it actually disproportionately affects women and people of color. With Amazon, on the other hand, the layoffs were judged on performance, which actually led to the percentage of women in professional and managerial roles growing over this time. It looks like this is having a positive impact on when we talk about race and gender. Would this be helpful for neurodivergent people? Well, that really depends on whether or not they are in an environment that allows their strengths and their skills to shine. So it's very much down to the culture, the training, the development, the mentorship, and the overall culture of the organization. So in conclusion, I think that the problem with all of these initiatives is that they require an individual to be in the workplace in the first place. And that's not an easy thing to do. The employee referral programs probably don't have a positive impact on neurodivergent people. And there's not really enough data out there at all for those of us with chronic illnesses. And the trouble is, when you're left out of the workplace, you only get further and further behind as the years go on. We have to work extremely hard for a lot less money in order to carve out niches, and it's definitely not rewarded in the same way that you would be if you were in employment. So I would love to see more done to tackle the recruitment problem, and I think that some of this also comes down to the way we think about businesses. I think that the way jobs are done is out of date now. I think more portfolio work would be better. So you had some work where you have that stability and support of the larger organizations, and you have some spaces where there's more room for freedom. I actually think that would be beneficial for organizations too, because they're likely to get more perspectives, more talent, more innovation. But it takes some rethinking, and we all know that big business is not very good at doing that. I'd also like to see more for support, like what was making me think is it would be really great to have more support for those who aren't in employment. And I'm not really asking for handouts. It's just when you see that there is so much additional support, especially training, mentorship, and a platform for you to show off your work, showcase your work. Sometimes I just think it would be nice to get some of those same opportunities that people who are in the workplace get. I've been thinking about kind of graduate trainee schemes. I think that would be really great for people at any age and at different levels within an organization as well. Ways to onboard people who aren't necessarily coming from the corporate life. And like I said, perhaps in a way that is part-time or flexible as well. Now, the initiatives that I mentioned that bring more people of color and more women into management and leadership roles are likely to be helpful overall in terms of changing perspectives in organizations, maybe starting to get a shift in culture. And training and mentoring is clearly going to help with that. In my career, I have found that training and mentoring, when it's been with the right people, has been helpful in terms of career progression. And right now, I don't really have anything like that, and I don't really know how to access anything like that. And sometimes I really wish that that's something that I had access to. If I take my own particular situation, I think early in my career, my challenges were largely due to a lack of self-advocacy because I don't really know how to prioritize myself within an organization. Good mentorship, training, and clear career pathways would really have helped with that. And don't get me wrong, I kind of love that what I do is innovative and different, and I think I'm always going to feel like somebody who wants to be a disruptor and wants to do things differently. But there should be space for that within organizations. In fact, it would benefit organizations. The other things that also really help all employees, which weren't really mentioned here, are things like clarity from leadership. And honestly, this should be a no-brainer from any leader or manager. But it's absolutely not. It was definitely not forthcoming for me when I was earlier in my career, and I continue to see it now. It goes back to people in leadership and management not having the right skills to best support the people that are working for them and to get the best out of those people. And honestly, that wasn't really mentioned much in this report at all. Flexibility and stability, as we talked about at GAP, I think that's a real panacea. It's what a lot of us are seeking. It's certainly what I'm looking for in work, and I do wonder sometimes if this is possible in some of the leadership roles where you can really make a difference. The people who seem to flourish the best in those kind of roles are those who are able to go out and socialize after work. Basically, if you're a drinker and you go out drinking with other people who are drinkers, who are in leadership roles, this still seems to me to be the way that most business gets done and most people progress through their career. And I think there are better ways, but unfortunately, perhaps that's just me with a chip on my shoulder, because I feel like that's very inaccessible to me. And of course, if you want to be in those kind of roles, there are compromises that are required. But I do think that there are ways to structure an organization so that people can perform at their best, and that their best will be better for the organization and better for themselves. So in summary, for as long as I can remember, I have carried labels such as woman or autistic. I have felt like I can't get into the room where it happens. I have felt like an outsider. When I've been let into the room, I've often felt tokenized. And over time, I think this definitely has put that chip on my shoulder. And while I do like to be different, I don't like the way that othering chips away at your confidence. DEI initiatives can be helpful, and there is a place, and I've certainly been given a platform because of certain DEI initiatives, especially when it comes to gender. But often those platforms can be quite hollow because there are still issues within the organizations that you're dealing with. These initiatives also continue to contribute to othering, and they still don't focus where the real problems lie, which is bad culture and bad leadership. Now, from looking through this report, high performance management techniques have been shown to have some impact on diversity alongside increasing business performance. And that's the kind of changes I like to see. But I don't think all the examples provided here are great examples of how we can create true high-performing cultures. After all of this, I'm left with one particular question for myself. Would I even choose a corporate life when I've been my own boss for so long? The access to mentorship, training, a salary, a pension, benefits, a team, a platform, a big name to stand your ideas behind. That's the kind of clout you need to make a real difference. And it's very enticing. But I'm yet to find a big organization that doesn't suffer from toxic culture, that doesn't have poor middle management. And therefore, I'm yet to find one where I can really make my strengths fly. If you know of any, please do let me know. But I also wonder if perhaps there's a little too much water under the bridge for that now. Maybe I'm better off just building my own businesses. It's worked for me before. Maybe it will work for me again. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.